I'm none of those three people. But I'm here to just make a brief introduction on the topic. Normally, we would have at this point a keynote speaker who will speak and inspire you and the rest of this conference on a topic of great importance to us all. But we're very lucky. We not only have one keynote, we have three. Two reasons for that. One is that actually it wasn't that difficult to attract people to Bangkok for a 10-minute talk and be able to spend a week here. But the main reason is that the topic, which is about accountability, is one of great importance to us all and really requires different perspectives. Okay? It's great importance is because it's really existential to us as evaluators, because we work for trustees of organizations that have to ensure that the resources that they manage are spent well. And the reason that they created us as evaluation units or hire you as individual evaluators is they want to make sure that is done well. And it's really complicated. If we were in the private sector, you wouldn't need evaluation units because the outcome to which we'll be held accountable is relatively simple: make money and attributable to what we do. But when the outcomes that we are concerned about are about development, about inclusive growth, about reducing poverty, about sustaining the environment, it's a bit more difficult to measure the outcomes and to ensure whether or not those outcomes are because of the actions to whom the resources are entrusted. From that reason, we have invited three people from three very different perspectives to come and talk to us about this complex and existential issue. They're here because they are, in their own right, either evaluation heads or professionals who work for organizations, but they're not here necessarily to represent those organizations, but because of their deep and collective insight based on their experience. So I'm going to introduce all three of them now, and I want to hear a collective round of applause for all three. And then I'll ask each of them to give their lightning accountability talks in very short order. So the three are Mark Sundberg, who is Chief Economist and Deputy Vice President of the Millennium Challenge Corporation of the U.S. government. He is so passionate about this topic that he's actually here while he's on leave. So thank you, Mark, for coming to us here. The second is Ravish Kumar, an Indian journalist and famously the recipient of the Ramon Magsaysay Award, which is the equivalent of Asia's Nobel Prize. So we're very honored to have you here, Ravish. And finally, Megan Kennedy-Schuan, who is head of evaluation of the Development Cooperation Directorate of OECD. They actually are the ones who are responsible for the criteria that we use as evaluators. So please give all three of them a round of applause, and then I'll ask Mark to come on stage.
Let me see, is the mic active now? Can you hear me all right? Okay, thank you. Sawasdee Krap. Thank you for the introduction, Manny. As Manny mentioned, I am here as a government employee, and I think I was asked to speak about accountability of the government because I work for the US government, but I'm here on leave. I'm in a personal capacity. I'm in no way representing the US government or speaking on behalf of the agency. So forget about the G20 and other accounts here today. When I was first asked to talk about perspective from the government of accountability, I thought about a classic Japanese film called Rashomon. Some of you may recognize this opening sequence in a temple in the woods, in the forest. And you might say, why think about this? on government accountability, and the reason is because it tells a very compelling and interesting story. This is a movie by the celebrated cinematographer Akira Kurosawa, and it has 4 characters that each give a different account of what transpires and a murder in the forest, an event in the forest. And there's first a woodsman who talks about what he sees. There is a crazed hunter, or crazed bandit, I should say, who is the perpetrator of this crime. There's a samurai warrior who is murdered and his wife ravished. And from each of these perspectives, including the samurai who's brought back to life to testify, you get very different perspectives, different narratives, and different incentives that drive this. So how does that relate to government? There are many different notions of accountability for government, and I'd like to talk about 4 of these. Starting with accountability to the taxpayer, to the public. We heard a lot this morning about the importance of fiscal responsibility, of budget management and performance, and that is key to the taxpayer. None of us, I think we all pay taxes. None of us enjoy paying taxes, but we all need public services. It's vital. And that accountability for budget propriety, for fiscal responsibility, is important, and it's important that it can be publicly scrutinized, including by a free press that is able to look at the figures and report back on government accountability. In my agency, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, the instrument we use is cost-benefit analysis, and I would venture to say that we take it more seriously than probably any other institution in development, the World Bank, I would guess the Asian Development Bank as well, because it is decisional. For every project that goes forward to a developing partner, we need to ensure a 10% rate of return over a 20 to 30-year period. It's reported to Congress, it's publicly available, it's seen on our website. So that transparency and the expectation of a rate of return, which is quite high, is very important, and important to ensuring the use of public resources. Another aspect of accountability of government is to the political environment. Civil servants report to their political overseers. And every 4 years in democracy in the United States, every 4 years for presidential elections, but in democracies there are elections that bring new leadership in, sometimes quite different from preceding leadership. And that newly elected president selects a cabinet, selects heads of agencies, and has a priority, a set of objectives it wants to see accomplished in their 4 years or 8 years in office. My experience was that 3 weeks after I was hired to the Millennium Challenge Corporation, Donald Trump was elected. And over the next 4 years, there were 5 different heads of agency. It was a period of some turmoil, and it was a period of new objectives, including greater emphasis on the private sector and coordination with the private sector, on less attention to climate change, and an ethos of making government smaller, of reducing the footprint of the government. It was quite a change from the previous 8 years. Fortunately, the Millennium Challenge Corporation has both Democratic and Republican support, and that enabled us to persist without large budget cuts. But it was a trying period. The third government accountability is to the mission of the agency we work in. The mission of MCC is poverty reduction through growth. That's our motto. And the way that we take that forward is focusing on working closely with country counterparts. We provide grants, not loans, so there's no debt, there's no collateral requirements. It's valuable aid, large scale, usually between $200 to $600 million. And we provide these as part of a model of contributing to growth, calculating what are the binding constraints to growth, and doing that jointly with country counterparts, ensuring that every program, every project is addressing a root cause of the binding constraints that are selected from a menu by the government counterparts that we work with. The fourth area I'd like to mention is the evidence. As evaluators, as public evaluators, I think this is a very difficult job. It requires that we sometimes take messages to politicians, to government, to our management that are critical. And we know that leadership is often allergic to critical messages. So an evaluator needs to use robust methodology that can be defended in front of the audience. They need to be independent so they're able to speak truth to power. And that makes a very difficult job, I believe. When I worked in evaluation at the World Bank before transferring to the federal government, there were many evaluations I saw at the World Bank where the pushback, the blowback, was challenging. And so I want to emphasize the importance of that independence, but being in the kitchen to see how the sausage is made, so to speak. How does this relate to Rashomon, the movie I mentioned at the beginning? In those 4 accounts in the forest, there were very different perspectives. And across these 4 accountabilities, there are different challenges and sometimes contradictions, trade-offs. Let me mention a couple of them. One is that when we make a big grant to advance development in a country that we partner with, we put that out for competitive bidding. If the bidder is from a country or a supplier where there are geopolitical tensions, that may force trade-offs between our commitment to value for money and our political environment. Another example is over country ownership. We are committed to working closely with country partners with ensuring that what we provide meets their needs and fills this binding constraint to growth, addressing the root causes that will create jobs, create prosperity. But when the government is prioritizing projects that don't meet the 10% rate of return requirement, or which don't fit within that analysis of growth, it creates this contradiction. And sometimes even things like, does the road point east or point west, can be politically charged. I want to end by pointing to what I think is perhaps the greatest challenge, the greatest paradox and problem for government accountability. And that is that we live in a world of short-termism. We see it everywhere. The focus on short-term benefits in the stock market, returns to stockholders. In politics, when a politician is elected, one of the first things they start worrying about is raising more revenue for their next political campaign. In personal decisions we make, using fossil fuels that we know are not priced with the externalities and costs for the future. Even in the way we do cost-benefit analysis, where a high discount rate forces us to value short-term benefits over the longer-term benefits. And I think this is the great challenge, to balance the needs of the generation today and future generations. Thank you very much.
Award, Ravish Kumar.
Namaskar. I cannot exactly identify when and where my understanding of accountability started to take shape. My class teacher in school was always on time, always. From the part of the world I come from, that is not always the case. Following his example, I too started going to school every day and on time. I learned that without punctuality, one does not really get a sense of accountability. Because of this one habit, I started making up for my shortcomings in studies. And instead of failing, I began to pass. From this, I learned that one must be accountable towards time. When there is a sense of honesty in one thing, then slowly honesty towards other aspects starts to emerge. That was my first tryst with accountability. Whenever public services expand into society, the public responds in different ways to those services. One hot summer afternoon, I was at friend's house and jokingly said to my friend's father that many people tamper with electric meter and don't pay the bill. Yes, that's a reality. Another example that people from my part of the world will understand. My friend's father didn't say much to me in response, only this, that everyone doing something wrong does not make it right. I would never like to do this. This incident taught me that accountability does not only mean passing an exam for yourself or your parents, or only going to school on time. But one must also be accountable in the eyes of the public. For this, it is important that you follow the rules of public services and laws astutely. There should be a certain honesty in your relationship with the state. Only then can you expect the state to be accountable to you. That, my friends, was my second milestone in understanding accountability. Time passed and I went to college. My history teacher once asked us to write an essay. He was surprised and liked what I wrote so much that he came to my house to check if I had copied a senior's writing. When he found nothing, he was genuinely delighted. That day, I experienced the joy of not having any skeletons in my closet. I knew that I had not cheated. Now, my teacher also knew this. This was a much bigger deal to me than my brilliant answer or getting good marks in my exam. If my school teacher taught me how to work punctually and properly, from my college teacher, I learned what work ethics is. If something is not done honestly and ethically, then even if that thing is great or even the best, it will have no impact. It will not attain lasting value. That was another tryst with accountability. After becoming a journalist, I went to cover an election. The ruling party of that state extended lavish hospitality to journalists. I had gone there along with my camera person, a woman. The politicians' colleagues or workers would also come into my room and would start offering me various things. Daily, together with my colleague, we had to find many ways to evade such people. Then one day, my colleague asked me, for how long will we try to evade them this way? We will have to confront them and tell them that we shall not take any favors. So please do not even try. That's exactly what I did. The moral strength behind this big no had been trained by my teachers from school to college till the time I became a primetime news anchor. It was this big no that allowed me to stand up to powerful people. I learned to distance myself from yes. The more detached you are from yes, the less likely you are to compromise. My third tryst with accountability. I came to realize that no consciousness of accountability is complete unless it is shouldered firmly on public good, like climate change, like regional cooperation. Journalism is a public good, and public goods cannot exist without love and compassion. I understood that unless you are honest towards people's issues, you cannot be honest towards your profession. Journalists are now forging global alliances to uphold accountability. The institutions of the media is not just about doing investigative journalism. Journalists across the world are working together on an individual and collective basis. Although their country's politics may be different, their sense of accountability is identical. They must be more precise and perfect in their work. Their integrity cannot afford to be doubted. These are people who hold themselves accountable for their profession, for their sake, and for the sake of true journalism. We cannot be complacent about accountability to the public and, most importantly, to oneself. Accountability is always being vigilant. It is almost like being a goalkeeper in football match. No matter how experienced a goalkeeper is, they must always be vigilant. The ball could come from any direction. The goalkeeper is the person in charge of intercepting or stopping the ball before it crosses the final line that is in the goal, and thus prevent the opponent from scoring a goal. As they say in football parlance, it is the lifeline of the teams. I, as a journalist, find myself in that goalkeeper's position, ready to defend the goal from every direction and not be taken by surprise. And I conclude by saying this. And I conclude by saying that as much as a journalist needs to be accountable to the public, they need to be accountable to themselves and to their profession. Thank you. Thank you very much.
At the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, our motto is better policies for better lives. And as the lead of the OECD's Development Assistance Committee's Network on Evaluation, my motto is better evaluation for better policies for better lives. And I know that's a motto that I share with so many of you here, because we can't help but notice how desperately our world needs better policies. Whether that's the collapse of our climate, which has already begun, and we see it with floods and wildfires across all of our countries. Whether that's seeing too many women and children that suffer violence in their homes. Whether that's seeing education and a child in India who goes to school only to find there's no teacher there to greet him. We see that we have not made enough progress despite many commitments. So one of our roles at the OECD is to establish norms and standards. And I've shared with all of you today our recently published glossary of key terms in evaluation and results-based management. One of the words we define in that document is accountability. And I have to admit that accountability is one of my favorite words. And I want to thank Saleha for having the idea of hosting today's panel, because I feel that evaluation, but more importantly the word accountability specifically, has started to have a negative connotation in recent years. I would say over the last 10 years in international development assistance and cooperation, we have seen that there's a huge shift away from accountability, and the emphasis is only on learning. We hear, no, we want evaluation for learning. We want to learn lessons. But accountability, this is kind of a dirty word. And I want to challenge us today as evaluators to push back on that, because we have a very important role to play for accountability. And I want to do that by sharing the OECD's definition of accountability with you, which I think is a definition that resonates across many different countries and cultures. And I want to highlight two areas about accountability: the accountable to whom and the accountable for what. And these two elements, I think, can help us shift the focus in accountability so that we focus on what really matters and we live up to the promise of evaluation for better policies for better lives. And this point is really key because in our international forums, we see the challenge not just of accountability and learning, but also of making progress. So the definition that's provided by the OECD says that accountability is the state or process of being responsible to someone else for something. For the public sector, this means being responsible to stakeholders such as taxpayers and the public for what is done why and how, including unintended negative effects. Now, I'd like to respectfully disagree with Mr. Manny Jimenez, and a little bit with Mark as well, because you said that you work for the board of the ADB, which is certainly true. But I would challenge all of you to say that actually, whether you work in the Ministry of Finance in China, or you work at the ADB, or you work for UNICEF, you actually work for the people of Asia. And your mission is to improve the lives of the people in Asia. And that is to whom you should ultimately be accountable for. And I was inspired to think this way when I had the pleasure of being invited to Beijing a couple of years ago. And I visited a museum that had a very interesting quote from the philosopher Confucius, which said that the common people have the right to evaluate their government's performance. And I found this very interesting because it drew my attention to the fact that accountability is not just accountability to the taxpayers or to the people who have money. Accountability should be to the child sitting in the classroom, should be to the farmer in the field. And that is a very important point about accountability. We need to be accountable to the people whose lives are impacted by the public policies that we promote. So that's the first element, accountability to whom? I think one of the reasons accountability has gotten a negative name in recent years is that we're too focused on accountability to donors and to where funding is coming from. So we need to shift that focus to think about being accountable to the people we are intended to serve. For if we're not serving those people, then why do we exist? Why have development agencies or development banks? Then we could simply support the simple work of the private sector, as Manny so rightfully said. So the second element I'd like to raise is around accountability for what? And here I'd like to share a story of when I was working in a small school in a rural area in a developing country. And there we were supposed to have lunch for the students every day. It was porridge. So to make the porridge, you need to have water, you need to have firewood to boil the water, you need to have flour, oil, and sugar. And somehow, one element was always missing. Many of the children in the school, they counted on that lunchtime meal as their main source of food during the day. So as a result, children were hungry, children were not focusing, and they weren't doing very well. So finally, I went down, I took 2 buses, and I arrived at the capital city to talk to the manager. And I said, you know, we don't have porridge for the children's lunch. And he said, oh, no, Megan, don't worry. And he took out his laptop, and he opened Excel. And he showed me the columns for porridge, for water, for sugar, for flour, for firewood. And he said, you see, Megan, we have porridge. And I said, yes, I see you have porridge in the Excel sheet, but I want to have porridge in the bellies and the stomachs of the children at the school, because that's where we really need porridge. Thank you. So this is about accounting. We don't need more accounting. Accounting is, of course, important, but we need accountability. And that's about being accountable for the actual impacts on people's lives. Not just how much money we've spent, not just the good intentions that we had at the beginning, but what effects has it really had on the people affected by the public decisions that we're making, the public policies, or the programs that we're implementing. This is also really important from the perspective of not forgetting that key element in the definition I shared earlier about looking at unintended effects. Because what we have seen is that too often there are unintended effects. The world is complex. People are complex. And if we create accountability systems that have the wrong incentives, we will end up hiding some of those unintended effects. And this can result in real harm being done. So we need to be careful that we're not only accountable for achieving the results, because I'm sure that Excel sheet was used very successfully to report to donors about hitting certain targets. But what we didn't see was unintended effects, for example, increasing inequality between students, or excluding women and girls from a development change process. So I've focused today on these two key elements, to shift our focus on being accountable for impacts on people's lives and on being accountable to the communities that are impacted by public policies and the decisions. As evaluators, I want you to be brave. The world needs us to be brave and to lean into that role, to hold decision makers accountable for the decisions they're making and the way it's affecting all of us. And together, in that way, we can have better accountability for better lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Megan, Mark, and Ravish. And may I now invite DG Manny and our 3 stars today on the stage, please, for a photo. Thank you, Manny. The next sessions will be parallel sessions beginning at 11 a.m. in the Pinnacle area near the registration. So you could take your time and take a little bit time and head on to that area for the parallel sessions. Thank you so much for being a wonderful audience in the morning session today. Thanks a lot.